So hello everybody and welcome to season 3, episode 10 of A Conversation with Cometan. We are here today with a returning guest, Stephen Wolfe, who was on last season, a couple of different events that we did together. And also we had a video that we did, just me and him talking last year. So I'll link that in the description as well. But hello, Stephen. Thanks for joining us today. How have you been, and what have you been up to since since we last spoke, I suppose?
Yeah, no, Cometan, always good to see you. We're doing very well. Obviously, we're trying to get through COVID.
Yes.
Knock on wood. So far, everyone we know is doing well and faring well through this. No, it's been an exciting time for me on a number of fronts. I don't know how far you want me to go with this, but I'm doing interesting work in South America, in fact, which is an emerging sector with regard to space development.
Yes.
And our focus there is on using satellite technology, specifically Earth observation technology, in ways that can support a variety of industries, including agriculture, mining, fishery, even security. And it's very exciting. We've met with a whole series of ministers at the national level, and are working on a variety of proposals to help bring this exciting technology to these countries down there that have really up until now have very little exposure to the capabilities of space. So that's that's very much on the leading edge of what is possible with space. But I know with you and I, and especially you and I are looking much further into the future and the potential of human expansion beyond Earth. Yes. But I think even as we look to expand our reach and help to create new branches of civilization on other planetary bodies, it's very important in this process that we bring folks along with us who don't naturally have this inclination, right? You and I have this sort of fire within us that understands this future that is emerging. To a certain extent, it's emerging whether we do anything about it or not. But it can be the transition could be a smooth one, or it can be a fitful, chaotic one.
Yes.
And I think it's up to us to make that transition as smooth as it could be, right? We like to use the metaphor of the pregnant woman, right? The Earth is pregnant and she's about to give birth to human life beyond the planet. So with that metaphor, as we well know, the birthing process naturally is obvious. Well, naturally, under the best of circumstances, is usually is a tough experience for the mother. Yeah. But it can be, and I know I've been through it twice with my wife. I can't speak for that personally, but I do know, but it can be done in a way that is easier if you take if you prepare yourself, if you're conscious that you first have to be conscious that you are pregnant, right? That helps. And we know that there are a lot of we hear these stories about folks who are just not aware that they're even pregnant until much later on. And to a certain extent, they're in denial. We know that some of these folks are even in denial of that. And I think that's the risk a little bit that we're in, right? We're a little bit in denial that this future is coming at us, right? And I just wrote a piece in my most recent newsletter that this future is coming at us, whether we can either, at some point, we're going to have to embrace that, right? So, at some point, again, let's just stay on this metaphor. When a woman first becomes pregnant,
yes,
there's a period that they don't know if they're pregnant.
Yeah.
Right. So the mechanisms are at work, right? Things are happening in their body that they're not aware of, and that at some point they get, at certain points, now if they know they're trying to get pregnant, then they're paying attention to how they feel and what's going on, and so forth. But at some point, they either take the pregnancy test or whatever it is, and it's just like, that's, hopefully that's the happiest moment in the woman's and her partner's life, that they're having a child. And then what do? They then, most people will then make preparations. They will make things, they'll take actions that make it easier or more likely for them to have a healthy, robust, strong child. They'll take the vitamins, they'll stop drinking wine, they'll stop drinking coffee, even though my wife insisted that 1 cup of coffee a day was fine. So she never quite stopped drinking coffee. But there's, you take all these measures that allow you to ensure that you're going to achieve the goal, achieve that end, that you have a healthy, strong baby comes out at the end of that process. And I think it's kind of, that's certainly where we are. The more we can understand that we are transitioning, that we're in the process of transitioning from a single planetary species to a multiplanetary species, right? So that the sooner that we can collectively accept that process is already taking place, right? We're already underway, kind of started back in a little bit in the Apollo era, right? And it's been progressing kind of slowly, but we're about to see a significant enhancement in human activity in space taking place in the coming just in the next 10 years will be very dramatic, and that could then create a real explosion after that in terms of human expansion. And the more we collectively accept this, and you and I certainly accept this, and this people in the Beyond Earth Institute community certainly accept this. But it has to be, we have to do all that we can do to spread this word, if you will, and get people to get comfortable, especially at the highest levels. And that's one of the reasons at the highest levels. I'm sorry, I'm waxing here.
No, it's great.
It doesn't take much to wind me up. I apologize. Let me leave it there for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, no, I like this. It's great to just get that thing that's on top of your head, and some people just like to, they have things that are on the mind, and then you just kind of say it. But it's great. No, I definitely relate to that metaphor. I see where we are right now as just kind of a natural evolution, really, that we're having to deal with. Change is difficult for different people. Some people don't like change. Some people are worried with the way the world is at the moment. I think those worries are definitely the valid worries, but they're not. They're not excuses to not engage with space, though. And I think we always have to stay positive and continue on in this endeavor. But yeah, I do definitely see it as the natural evolution. And this is the way that we're going, and you know that, and I know that, and people in the community of space know that. It's just about how we communicate that to the broader world, to, like you said, government officials, and you do that in different ways. I mean, I have my particular ways that I do it. I do it mainly through spreading the ideas of Astronism, because that's my philosophy that I lead with. To me, the more people who know about Astronism or any other different philosophical movement, there's quite a few that have started popping up over the last couple of years. Different isms and different, space themed movements and things. All of them are contributing to this cultural, philosophical rising upwards, so definitely. But of course, one of the things actually that I wanted to talk about today, actually, this really relates to this topic, is the idea of the beyond Earth worldview. And this is really what we're talking about here, is changing the worldview of people, or adding to the existent worldviews of individuals. Now, Astronism has what we call the cosmocentric worldview. There's different words for this same idea of just placing outer space as the main focus of our policy, culture, philosophical outlook. Do you see this as an important element of your work, but also the broader work of the community, trying to create a kind of philosophical basis to what you're doing? There always has to be some kind of philosophical element, I think, to kind of everything, really. Do you see this kind of beyond Earth worldview, or cosmocentrism, or whatever you want to call it, as a kind of vehicle for that, maybe?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's very important. As we, at the Beyond Earth Institute, we're trying to advance policy. We usually like to use the term sober. We're trying to advance sober policies that will help to advance our march, if you will, into space as a civilization.
Yes.
We look at the current policy portfolio, the current space policy that the governments of the world are most focused on, and then we try to look at that through the filter of, okay, how in some ways does this advance us towards that ultimate goal? Can we make recommendations in the near term that tweak it so that small turns, so that we're helping to point this whole endeavor in the right direction? So there's that piece of it, but I do think it's very important that that this philosophical dimension of this is part of the process, right?
Yeah.
So in every opportunity, we do try to inject language. Yes. Now, it's not necessarily in the form of written policy recommendations, but in general discussions on our webinars and so forth, we inject language that takes that has the presumption or presumes that all these things that we are doing are helping to lead us towards a civilization, human civilizations in space. Yes. That's one part of it. So I do think that the more that people could kind of can begin to accept that notion, right, that we're moving in that direction, that's going to help us in terms of the policy. Because the policy, and this is where when I was a few years ago, when I was contemplating in what aspect of the space development do I want to focus on, or needs to be focused on. We're looking at technology, we're looking at financing, we're looking at advocacy. And I realized that a very important pathway towards this future is through effective public policy, both in the United States and internationally, of course.
Yes.
And the more, so it's not, so part of it is educating the public, right? And I think you're looking at a public education process in a broad sense. There's also educating the key influencers that are, and the key policymakers that ultimately hold the keys to a large extent as to whether or not, how is the money being spent? What are the regulations, the enabling regulations that can be passed, or that could be, or maybe certain policies might get in the way of what we're trying to do, and how do we adjust those policies so that they're more conducive to what our goals are for the future. So the more that we can inject this philosophical understanding into the minds and hearts of the policymakers themselves, the more that they will be willing to say, oh, okay, then let's make those changes. Let's spend the money in this way rather than in this way. Let's bring in, the more likely to bring in commercial or private investors, so that we can increase the amount of money and investment that's made collectively. Government has a part to do, private sector has a part to do, and we create an opportunity for this kind of growth. So yeah, no, that I can't stress that enough. And then the and I don't expect to do it all. I mean, I do think it is important for the work that you do. Hopefully that reaches policymakers as well as everybody. I mean, you're very familiar with the work of Frank White, of course. You probably had him on your show. He's pushing that in that regard. There are a number of people that are trying to bring about this collective understanding. Now, the only thing I'll say here, I do want to, if you don't mind, I'll add another add on here. So, if we look at human development throughout history, right? So we've evolved to a certain point, and we've gone from being having a sense of being connected to our family. Our family was number one, and anybody outside our family was the enemy. Then we became tribal, right? Who was in our tribe, and anybody outside our tribe was the enemy or competitor. And then we eventually we evolved into maybe kingdoms, and kingdoms evolved into nation states. And so we're kind of at this place where now we have the United Nations, right? So we have this sense. So our worldview, right, collectively, not everyone, obviously there are ranges. Some people still have, family is the only thing that matters, and anything outside they don't understand. But obviously, and there's other people that say that our country is the best country in the world, and But I think we're emerging now to having a planetary perspective, right? And this is brought about, through our recognition of climate change, and we're kind of all in it together. The environmental movement, that we're all in it together. So that we do have a sense of a world family, but that is a world-centric view, right? So the challenge is going from a world-centric view, which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing, to having a space-centric view. And actually, Frank White will say first, it's a solar system-centric view. We become solarians, as he says, and that changes the dynamic tremendously. Now, here's the challenge. The challenge is, up until now, those those views of who we are in the context of the world has evolved naturally as conditions changed over time.
Yes.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to instill a space-centric view in a context where there really isn't anybody living in outer space yet. So how do we, so then that cracks open the potential of it's a question of consciousness. And this is where a higher level of consciousness comes into play, right? So, and I don't know if you've gone into, I don't know if your philosophy gets into the range of the evolution of consciousness itself. I'm curious your views on this, if you follow this a little bit. But there's there are a lot of folks out there that are saying, you know, the human consciousness is kind of cracking open for many people. It is a result of certainly, to a certain extent, evolution.
Yes.
This evolution has been accelerated by a increasing interest of folks going in deep within themselves to understand the true nature of reality and so forth. And it's just allowed us to sort of potentially evolve on a conscious level. Once we evolve on a conscious level, then it's easier for us, then what I'm getting at, it's easier for us to then see to have a space perspective on our lives and on the future of life that emerged on this planet and so forth. It's easier for us to see the ongoing evolutionary path that we're already on. So,
yes, totally agree. I think that with anything with humanity, there's always going to be people who don't see our way of our worldview. There will always be people who believe the earth is flat, for example, you know, so there will always be these individuals who don't see how we see the future. And that's all right, because I wouldn't want it 100%, you know, people who believe as we do and see the world as we do. That's fine. I don't like 100% of things. You know what I mean? In that way, I like it where people can have, you know, that freedom to be able to believe what they truly do believe. The interesting thing about it, though, is that the individuals that we are speaking to and that we've spoken about already, and this community that we're involved with, we are these individuals who are pushing for this, and we're pushing for this change. We are helping to kind of, our role really is to help to guide others into this ideas and into this change, like you were saying about the consciousness and things like that. I think that's very important to Astronism, by the way, and I'm continuously developing the ideas of like an astro consciousness or something like that type kind of idea that of a connection to the astronomical world, and even my own connection in that sense is still very, you know, I'm still only 23 myself, so I've still got a long way to go, but I actually do see, funnily enough, some similarities between, I don't know, our community and people from centuries past. You know, if you look at things like the Bible and you read how people groups, you know, like just, I don't know, different tribes and things, different cultures, obviously they used violence most of the time to get what they wanted, but they had these kind of struggles and they persevered, and they were chosen people as well. I think that's quite an interesting idea. You know, the idea that there are certain individuals who are who have a deeper connection to the astronomical world, who have a deeper connection to space, who have that kind of vision. Not to say that they're prophets or anything, but I think there always will be people who have that kind of vision of what's outer space is, that understanding, and also what humanity could be in outer space. When I was looking at, for my master's dissertation, I was looking at some of the oldest examples of rock art, astronomical rock art, and things like this, and people depicting during the Stone Age, depicting like comets crashing and stars and things. You know, those individuals obviously had some kind of similar feelings, ideas to us. Obviously, we have a much greater understanding of what is up there, but these individuals had that. So it's obviously there was a lot of people who didn't, but there always will be that. It's an interesting idea, but I think it's I don't know. I think we just have to persevere in our in what we believe in, and these are beliefs at the end of the day. I was speaking to someone recently who was less kind of philosophical, more scientific based, which is fine, and they were sort of questioning my my use of this term belief, you know, because it's so related to kind of religion and things like that. But these are beliefs. We don't know what's going to happen with humanity in space. We don't know. We can predict, we can envision, and we can think, but these are beliefs at the end of the day. We believe in outer space. We believe in humanity. We believe that we have the potential, the capacity to go into outer space, to expand, as we've been speaking about. So these are beliefs. We are a community of people. Obviously, most of us and some of us haven't even met each other. I've not met you in person, for example. But that's the wonder of technology, and how I just see the stars aligning. You know, to make a bit of a pun there. You know, they really are. I think technology and social media is bringing people together who have similar ideas. That's how my ideas have spread so far. You know, I grew up in the social media generation. I'm part of that. So it was natural for me to get onto online and start speaking about space, you know. I don't want to go on too long, but I do get what you're saying about this idea of consciousness, mastering that. I have different words for things, you know. We all have different words, and sometimes words can be a barrier. I've found that already. You know, Frank White might have different words to what I'm speaking about, or someone else, you know. I think that will develop with time. Perhaps you think so as well. I think eventually we will, I don't know, all come together at some point, hopefully.
Well, if I may, those nice series of thoughts there, by the way, and it reminds me, your last comment reminded me of a spiritual teacher that I spent a lot of time listening to and following and reading. But he talked about this sort of, he talks about enlightenment. Okay, but I think we could sort of we could swap out the idea of humankind's future in space as a substitute for enlightenment. And what he says is that, you know, it's like a jewel, right? The potential for space is like a jewel, right? The potential for enlightenment is like a jewel. And you could turn that jewel, and every facet of light is different, right? But it's all this part of the same jewel, right? So I like the way you said, and that gets to the language.
Yes.
That you're talking about. I did spend some time on your website,
Okay.
and there's a lot of language creation
Yeah.
with your thinking, which very very interesting stuff, and certainly Frank is, he likes to create terms to explain things, and I think that there's a need for us to, as we evolve up, as we begin to talk about things that have never been talked about, there's a need for new language to be injected into this. And I think as you point out, the language will eventually become more common and so forth, and will be parts of what you're saying, parts of what Frank. And let's face it, the term overview effect is now part of the common lexicon. It's part of when people say the overview effect. Very broadly, not everyone, but very broadly, people know exactly what that is. And that's kind of exciting.
It is. But that takes time, doesn't it? It takes. I was that like the 1980s or maybe 70s when he first coined that, I think.
1987.
Yeah.
I had I still have my copy. I still have my original copy of the book.
Brilliant.
That when it first came out, and I went to a reading, an event that he spoke at, like the week that the book was released.
Yes.
And got it signed by him at that time. So I was already completely taken, and he's been a big influence, become a good friend over the years.
Yes.
And we've worked together on different things and so forth. But and hopefully, you and I will do the same thing. We should talk about, to what extent we can work together.
Definitely.
I'm very, the philosophical dimension is so important. And I think there's a lot of people in the sciences and maybe not as much in the policy side, but certainly people in the sciences and on in the humanities that are very much in tune with this philosophical discussion. And I think it needs to continue. And getting back to your point, about belief, I really like the way you put that it is a belief in that there are no guarantees, right? There's no guarantees. On the one hand, I could say that I'm drawing a conclusion based on trends and based on looking at the historical development of the human race, and maybe you could say I'm to an extent we're connecting the dots, and it's going. We think there's a trend, because I keep using the term that we're already on this process, right? If this was 1950 or 1940, and I said that we're you think about Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, right? The famous Russian philosopher, was talking about this stuff at just after the turn of the century, the early 1900s, and he's talking about human settlement of space. Now, that really was a belief. There was no dots to connect that at all in terms of the progression. There was nothing at that time, and he saw he had this incredible ability to sort of envision this future world of spaceflight and what that ultimately will mean. And of course, he also has his own religion and philosophy, cosmism. I don't know if you've looked into that.
Yes.
Russian philosophy, very interesting, very early on, and to a large, and we could say to a certain extent, because so many people in that age, in the early part of the century, the last century, were influenced by his thinking, that it stimulated he basically, the future that he created was created based upon his vision. You know, it's sort of like all of the Star Trek technology that's in place right now was stimulated by people watching Star Trek, which seemed ridiculous. How can you talk to a computer and your computer talking back to you and answering your questions? That seems silly. Or, you know, or a little device that you hold in your hand allows you to talk to people. You know, that's crazy. You know, so I do think that there is now, whether the question for us, and maybe we can't possibly answer it because of our limited, you know, we're still little creatures crawling around on this planet, right? But the question is, was there a plan in place? That's the question. And I do argue for this, frankly, in my book, whether it's actually true or not. Again, it's just an insight that there's an underlying plan for us all and for the human race over time, right? And that we have evolved to certain places, and that ultimately, and I compare it to a DNA code.
Yes. That
there is a DNA code that says that on a fertile planet that is conducive to life to emerge, that life will emerge, will evolve to the point of sentience. Yes. And that sentient life eventually will inhabit the entire inhabitable portions of that world, and that will then seek to leave that world, right? And so, and that's my philosophical view, right? And I'll put it there. That's the view that I essentially articulate in the obligation. And for anyone listening to this, maybe I'll make the plug now. Yeah. So you know, the obligation. It's on the it's a philosophical point of view written in a novel form, as a novel, a fictional novel. On Amazon. Encourage people, if they're interested in that concept, to look it up. So anyway, yeah. But anyway, I love the idea of belief, because we can play with that so much. You know, it's what is really belief. You know, you have to have belief to a degree. You have to believe. In other words, you have to believe that we're going in the right direction, right? At any moment, right? But that belief is no guarantee we're going to get there. There are some people I know at NASA. I think that they really, really want us, human life, to expand into space. I think they really believe that that's the direction, but they are so focused on all of the things in space that can kill us, you know, and before they come out, if you will, they're so adamant that we should not be making any pronouncements about humans expanding into space until we have resolved this list of 30 list of 30 items, like radiation, gravity, et cetera, until we resolve all of these things on the checklist. We shouldn't even talk about human settlement of space. And of course, I reject that idea. I see that list of 30 as merely technical obstacles that we need to simply overcome.
Yes, I do reject that as well. I think for a long time you do have to talk about things first for it to manifest later on. Nothing manifests without first discussing it and talking about all the different possible aspects of it. Philosophers have been talking for thousands of years, and they will continue to do so. I think sometimes, see, I'm involved. I really, obviously, I'm very interested in rocketry and the actual physical expansion in space. And that, it's funny, it's a funny relationship, because those activities are so integral to my beliefs, my core beliefs, that those things happen and that they go well. But at this stage, I don't know. I think I'm just, for myself personally, I think there's just so many philosophical, religious, and various other categories of obstacles theoretically and unanswered questions that at the moment, I mean, maybe hopefully in the future, I don't know. I mean, I maybe could help contribute in another way, but at this stage, for me personally, my contributions that I see is me kind of trying to develop, trying to answer some of these questions that I can, or give options, different options to what could happen, and what are the philosophical implications. Because someone criticized me that recently, where they were saying like, well, what are you doing to get us into space? Do you know what I mean? They just didn't understand what my role was at all. They said, well, you're not like a rocket scientist, so what are you doing? And I kind of had to sit back and think, well, yeah, I mean, what am I doing? Well, I'm talking about ideas of space, you know, and it does sound a bit for someone who's very not as theoretical and interested in philosophy, that might sound very abstract and, you know, not very concrete, you know. But I think it is important that we talk about these philosophical questions. I was doing a conversation with another individual who's involved in space, and we were talking about all sorts of great questions, like, we were talking actually about life on other planets. Actually, that was the topic, and we were saying, well, if there is life on other planets, what are the implications for that? And if there isn't life, what are the implications of that? You know, so we were going through all these different options, these different questions. You know, these things have to be discussed. They've never been discussed before in a very philosophical manner, very systematic way. Really, I mean, maybe for the last 100 years, you know, we've seen developments, like you mentioned, the cosmism, and that was kind of the beginning of this modern discussion of these types of questions. But the idea of space philosophy or space religion, whatever you want to, and I think those two are different things as well. I think they're connected, but I think they are different things. It's still very much in its infancy. You know, there's still, you know, it's not been institutionalized. It's not been, the terminology isn't very widespread. We're still at the beginning stages of developing this branch of philosophy. It is a whole new branch of philosophy. People sometimes don't realize that. You know, when we're talking about space, the topic of space is a whole new branch of philosophy. When I'm speaking about space exploration, the philosophy of space exploration, I was speaking to a Peruvian astrobiologist on a previous episode, and he's interested in astrobiocentrism. He's interested in studying astrobiology, obviously, but the philosophy behind astrobiology. So there's all these great individuals who are having these discussions like we are, but we have to have them, don't we? Do you not agree? We have to. I think they can happen concurrently to things that are developing in rocket science and the physical exploration of space, you know?
I couldn't agree with you. Couldn't agree with you more about that. And I think one of the challenges, you know, I'm glad it's not taking place here, but when I get on some of these calls, and people want to talk about space philosophy, there's this tendency that we kind of start talking about the technology, and we start talking about things that aren't at the heart of, okay, well, if we're talking philosophy, let's talk philosophy. You know, if we're talking, you know, let's stay with this, let's stay in this zone. You know, the idea that, and I think it's so great. I mean, I'd love for you just to stay in this arena and push through it, because I do think that there's a role for folks, you know, to just spend their time on this subject. And I, you know, because I think some of the folks that are most that are doing this kind of thing are also, you know, Frank White might be the closest thing. You know, it's certainly not a distinguished, it's defined profession just yet, but it should be eventually. So yeah, no, I would definitely reject the idea that you know, this whole idea, well, what are you doing, kind of thing. It's sort of it's not. I mean, you're writing, you're sharing, you're communicating, you're bringing to light, and hopefully with each one of these, you know, webinars, with each time you're putting something out there, you get one or two or three more people that come in and say, wow, I never thought of it that way. And then they start looking at your other videos, and they start doing their own investigation, and and their mind starts to expand, right? So, I mean, I don't know if I think we talked about, you know, the emergence of this consciousness. I know for me, it was very dramatic when I was young. And I think you had a similar experience. Now, it doesn't have to be, obviously, you know, your head doesn't have to explode necessarily to start to grasp the potential of this, of what we're talking about. But even just going from, wait a minute, I think of myself as a citizen of the world.
Yeah.
What does it mean if I'm really a citizen of the solar system? What is that, you know? And then just allow yourself to go down that rabbit hole a little bit, you know, to say, what does that really mean for me and my and human life and life in general? Not from a science fiction standpoint, but for real. And I think that's where science fiction has been so helpful in so many ways, but to a certain extent, you know, you can, science fiction is so good these days that you just sort of accept what's on the screen, rather than sort of really start to explore for yourself, given where I am, where civilization is right now for real, and what does it mean for real, for, you know, maybe my kid for real to go to Mars, for real to my grandchild, for real to be a first colonist on the moon or on Mars or in deep space. What does that mean? You know, and I think if you allow yourself to contemplate that, it's you know, it really can expand your mind. And so certainly encourage anyone listening to this to take on that kind of a challenge, you know.
And I think it's interesting how there's these different movements. What I'm trying to do at the moment is to try to list them all and try to, you know, research as much as I can and try to get a real good understanding of the kind of taxonomy, really, kind of like right, so this movement believes this movement believes that, I believe this, these different individuals are part of this. I'm trying to kind of organize it together a little bit at the moment.
Can I make a suggestion? I want to hear the rest of what you're saying, but you know, I envision a summit meeting of all these groups. You know, and I'd love to work on that. But anyway, continue.
I've had visions of that for the future, definitely, where people who have the same kind of vision come together, kind of like the Christians did, you know, when the ecumenical councils, where they're all arguing. And that's one of the greatest things I love about Christian, the history of it, is I can just imagine them all sitting there and arguing and trying to come together, some kind of ideas. You know, because I obviously love studying religion and things, so that's hopefully what will happen sometime in the future, where all these great people can come together and argue.
Right. So the challenge will be, you know, where does the traditional, when you say religion, obviously you automatically fall into the context of, you know, the traditional view of God, you know, comes into this, and what is what do you mean by God, you know, in a religion of space?
Yeah.
And is it the same God as the Judeo-Christian God, you know, or not? Or is it something? Or I mean, is it integrated with this, or is that you know, okay, if you're a Christian or Jewish or Muslim, you know, that's your belief in that regard. What we're doing here is really something different. I don't know. I'm curious to see what you think about.
Well, it's quite interesting. I was thinking about this recently, actually, because I do classify Astronism, and I can only speak for Astronism. I can't speak for other things other movements that are taking place at the moment. But I really do see Astronism as a completely separate thing from anything else. I've noticed, because I study new religious movements as well as part of my studies, and I've noticed that some try to incorporate ideas of Christianity using Christian symbols, but actually when you get down to it, they're not actually Christian. Scientology is one that kind of uses that Christian cross for some, maybe they use it for different reason, but it's just, I don't know, there is kind of those similar things there. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, because I think that I think the reason why those religions do that is to make it seem, what's the word, more resembling to what people are familiar with. Yeah, more familiar for people. It's not such a, you know, a drastic change. Whereas from what I've been doing, you know, I created the symbol of Astronism, which was totally different. That emerged, and then ideas that kind of emerged that I saw as completely distinct. I didn't want to incorporate anything from any other religions yet at that stage. There are some ideas, some fundamental ideas about like salvation and things like that you hear in Christianity, but the source and the theme of it is definitely outer space. So it is completely distinct. Then came across this idea of the Stone Age people who I came across these this wealth of research that has taken place regarding the rock art and things that have taken place from 40,000 years ago. So then I started thinking, right, let's put like a timeline together here to try and connect what I'm doing and what other people are doing today to these people going right back, because I really do see a kind of a sort of connection between us. So but no, I do think that what we're doing now needs to be totally separate, and that's again why I've created words like astronist. Someone messaged me the other day actually and said, you know, they'd been kind of having these kind of feelings, you know, about space, and they'd had these connections since they were a child. They were older than me, you know, so they'd had these ideas before I was around, but they kind of identified with astronism, and they like the word astronist, so they'd started to use that, and they'd used that for about a year, and I didn't even know. They just happened to message me, you know. I wouldn't know, would I? They're on the other side of the world somewhere. So that's the wonder of social media. But no, I think other people might disagree, but I think we need to be distinct. I think that as a community of people, we need to be.
Well, do you mind if I ask you a fundamental question, maybe? And I apologize if I should have read this or whatever, but I'm curious. There's what would you say is the spiritual foundation of Astronism? Did I pronounce that right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, it depends on belief in a spiritual essence. So you have to go into philosophy there in a way, and kind of accept this idea of there existing a material and a spiritual. I've come across people, and I still flirt with the ideas, but I have come across people who still identify as astronists, or people as in space, people who believe in space, who don't believe in the spiritual aspect. And that's fine. They only believe in the material world. But no, I think that regarding the spiritual foundations, I see and I felt, not only I think, but I've experienced a spiritual, the only kind of word I can come up with is kind of connection. I've had experiences in my life like akin to a religious ecstasies, where I'm usually, I have been around other people, but some of the earliest ones that were quite fundamental to developing astronism happened when I was alone, and I was sort of in contemplation, and I was I don't know, I just saw visions and had these kind of intense, I don't know, they kind of left. I didn't physically leave the world, but I did in my mind, and experienced visions as well. I've experienced those since I was 15 years old, and I had also physical symptoms of it as well. I've experienced heart palpitations and all types of symptoms afterwards, after these sort of spiritual, very intense ecstasies. And that's the word I use because that's what religions, Christianity particularly, has used to describe these kind of intense internal associations with something higher. Yes, the astronomical world is higher, and some people don't kind of see that sometimes because it's material. They don't kind of see that it could have a spiritual element to it. Whereas obviously with God is always higher. God is the highest. So I think maybe there's a bit of confusion there or something, but no, I've had those experiences, and what I've tried to do on the back of those is to try and explain how they might have come about. And so what emerged from that was this idea that the astronomical world, not just like this, religions for thousands of years have spoken about sort of a Mother Earth and nature being very involved, having this sort of spiritual essence to it. And I, in a way, I've just kind of applied that to the astronomical world. Other people have done that in the past, obviously. There was, astral gods and star and sun gods and things like this. So there must have been something where there was a spiritual belief about outer space. But yeah, I've just tried to explore it and tried to come at it in a different new way. If you don't believe in the existence of spirit, in the existence of a spiritual essence, you can still be an astronist, and you can still believe in all of the other aspects of it. It isn't a dogma. It's not a. You have to have had these kind of spiritual experiences. Some people just aren't spiritual. I've come across these people, you probably have yourself, who they're quite philosophical people, but they just don't have that other side to them. They just don't have it. They can kind of cultivate it. They can try. I've met people who don't want to try, who don't want to engage with that. They're not interested in that, but they are still interested in space. So I am always trying to accommodate in some way all these different types of people, trying to relate to them without trying to isolate them either, because I think we can all our common theme is space. Our common theme is that, and we all engage with that in different ways.
Right. Well, it's interesting, you're so honest about your spiritual experiences. And and I've really come to see that as just a kind of a natural experience, as part of the natural, if you're in meditation or deep contemplation, in a quiet moment. I mean, more and more people are meditating these days.
Yeah.
You're inviting, if you're clearing your mind, right? You're clearing your mind. You're now inviting something to come. You're inviting something that isn't your mind. Yeah. Whatever your mind is, whatever your thoughts are, you're inviting something else to emerge and present itself within you. And that can be very, it could be quite an experience, right? So it could be quite a strong, and for lack of a better word, we call that a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
It can evoke visions. People will then debate, well, did that vision come from your mind, or did that come externally? Yeah. And in some ways it's not really, I don't think it really matters, and what it does is, and I think for someone, like you, and it shows, it helps to sort of, again, to get your own self out of the way to a degree, to feel this and have this experience, and then, as you say, to unpack it afterwards. It then has inspired you to, create something that wasn't there, that needed to be created. Let's just put it that way. I think it was, again, getting back to the original discussion of the facet of the jewel. Maybe my book and the thoughts in my book are one facet of the jewel. Your thinking and your facet. Whole religion is another facet. Frank White has his facets, but they're all basically showing different faces of the same thing.
Yes.
Helping to prepare all of us that human race is in this awesome, amazing transition period. I mean, could you think of a better time to be alive? And I envy you, because you're at the beginning of your life, and I'm inching closer. I'm at the beginning of the end of mine. Let's just put it that way. And just the things that I just put it this way, you will, in all likelihood, live to see this transition complete, in that there will be communities of people living on the moon and Mars and in free space. By the time you pass, as long as you live to be, you should live to be 120 years old, if not longer. I would imagine, given the medical science and so forth, how much that's advancing. But so it could not be a better time to be alive on this planet. For all our challenges, let's face it, the United States is a mess. There's so much geopolitical nonsense that's taking place. Our only hope is that we will sort of kind of get through all that nonsense and come out the other side a little bit wiser as a global community, and again, so that we can embrace this future fully.
Do you know what an idea I just had was about this idea of clarity, because you were saying about the nonsense of the geopolitics, and I agree with that. It is nonsense. What I want for humanity is to become more clear, is to really, there's a lot of noise in the world right now, and I think we need to just become we need to clear it all and just really focus on the things that are important. One of which, of course, we're going to advocate for is space exploration, but other things as well, you know, like health and medicine, technology, people's well-being, you know. Hear a lot of stories about people not feeling well inside their mind. You know, why? You know, like you said, we're living in the greatest time that there has ever been in that sense, you know, in terms of medicine and things. Why are there so many people with these mental conditions? Why? It's affected my family personally, and I often wonder about that. Why? What is happening? Do you know what I mean? So it's that side of things is what we need to be focusing on. We need to be focusing on making humanity better. These are ideals, you know. There'll always be people who have their own agendas. There'll always be someone said to me, like a phrase, wars and rumors of wars, you know, which is of course what's taking place in Europe at the moment, on the eastern side of Europe. But you know, it's what I hope for humanity in the coming, you know, decades, hopefully, is that we'll become more clear in our purpose, more clear in our understanding of where we're heading, you know, and more clear on our priorities. You could argue one thing that I am just keeping a close eye on is adherence to different religions, like bringing back to that again. The UK has just brought out its census results, and we are almost now a non-religious country, almost, which is just unheard of. I mean, Christianity, the Church of England, has been here for 500 years almost, you know. So it's what is happening there is interesting. That's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in what people believe. I'm interested in what drives people. I'm interested in how their well-being is and how their beliefs can affect that well-being. I think someone was talking to me as well a couple of weeks ago about you know, the future of belief, the future of religions. It's quite interesting, I think, to think about the idea that new religions will come, and old ones maybe will go. That seems to be one of the trends at the moment, is that these traditional religions that we've been adhered to are no longer aligning with modern, contemporary, at least a proportion of our beliefs. So I just hope that there might be a bit more clarity. Do you hope for the same, just as a kind of, because I know we've run over time, but just as a kind of, you know, concluding idea about what we've been talking about? Do we hope for clarity? Do we hope for renewed sense of purpose? How, you know, we bring that about?
No, you bring up a few interesting points there to unpack. The idea about religion, gosh, you know, I grew up Catholic. My wife is Jewish. But I do think that the Bible is a wonderful, wonderful book, but you know, it was written in ancient times, and I think that I don't think we ever want to lose the message, the fundamental messages, especially the teachings of Christ.
Yeah,
are universal, and I imagine they will apply, you know, well, centuries into the future.
Yeah.
But the way we this adherence, and membership in these traditional religions, I see that they could give way to other kinds of religions. I'm thinking, and I'm thinking specifically about this notion about this. We have a different view of how the universe has come to be. So there's a new creation story based on science that we really can't ignore this creation story about the Big Bang and evolution.
Definitely.
And frankly, that story might be upended with the new space telescope, with the James Webb Space Telescope, as it starts to look back to the very beginning of the Big Bang. What is it going to see? What kind of data and what kind of new ideas about, it could completely destroy our
humanity deal with that. And that's another thing I was thinking, can we deal with what we might find? That's quite interesting. Can we deal?
I think that I think fundamentally we're a resilient species, that we're, I mean, some people will cling to certain ideas, but other than that, mostly we're a resilient, especially our scientific class. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to change my worldview at any time in terms of what science may tell us, or science at best can suggest, I mean, and so we have to understand the limits of science as well. Science is not a religion. Science is measuring things and trying to draw the best conclusions as we can about what we've measured. That's science, and that's not belief, and that's not religion. That's so I think we're trying to sort of talk about in this context something more profound. And with respect to and maybe we could leave this here, because with respect to what does this mean for people on Earth for the long term, I do think that this awakening that I mentioned before, this coming into a higher consciousness, that is so important. I think it's so important for us to grasp the space environment as our home as much as the Earth.
Yes.
This sense of higher consciousness, also recognizing that we are all one, right, on this planet. There's no one who is the least of us. That we want to gain a global position, certainly through our leadership of the world, where we say that the least fortunate child in the least fortunate country is just as important as the most fortunate child in the most fortunate country of the world, and that we need to address those concerns collectively, because we want a global society where all our fundamental needs for everyone are met in terms of housing, in terms of education, in terms of livelihood, in terms of access to being self-actualized to the fullest extent that each person can be. And we really are so far from that. Well, I'll say that we are so far from that, but in another way, we aren't, because it really would just be a matter of all of these issues and problems can be resolved globally, but it would be a matter of a different way of seeing things, and that's not, you can't simplify this challenge either. But I do think it goes hand in hand. I also, and I think I articulate this somewhat in my book, whether it's true or not, I do think that the expansion, as we expand into space, some portion of the population, even a small portion of the population, that itself is going to crack open a greater consciousness that will affect the home planet as well, collectively, and that I do believe in. That's a true, whether that happens or not, that's a belief.
Yeah, and Well, that's a good way to end it, I think, today. But, a great conversation ended in a really nice way there. And I think we've covered a lot there. And I think it will give people, I hope, further people who've just come into space, thinking about space in this way, it might just give them that introduction that they were looking for, and might get them to, continue their exploration. So I thank you for coming today, Steve, and I hope that you will return, because it's always great to have these in-depth conversations, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch, because we always do anyway. But thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, Cometan. And if I may, just just for anyone who might be interested in contacting me, I'm certainly welcome to steve@beyondearth.org. As simple as that. So thanks again, Cometan. I really appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you again.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks. Bye, everybody. See you later.